Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today is Thursday. We are approaching ever closer to the release of Dragonflight, and after yesterday's video about the tips and tricks and the short guide of what you should do as soon as you get your dragon, rather than keeping your shitty dragon until you hit max level as it is, spend half an hour or so empowering your dragon to be a little bit better at flying around as you level. Today, instead, we have a more macro approach to the tips and tricks. I am instead going to give you a list of good resources, a list of good links for your Dragonflight leveling, as well as what to do in the first week of the max level experience in Dragonflight, as well as what to be prepared for before the expansion even comes out, what you should know about your plans, about what you have to do in your leveling experience and in your first few days of your max level experience in Dragonflight to get you well prepared, to give you as much knowledge as possible before the expansion comes out. So for today we have three resources, we have three links to give out. One is a little bit more on a macro level, a little bit more of a general type of help. One is a very micro oriented, it's literally going to pilot you from start to end, and the other one is the most in-depth possible that you can find. So starting with the macro one, this is a recurring theme. This is a guide, a leveling and max level explanation type of guide from Chillaway, which has made these type of guides before. So this guide is much more on the explanation side, rather than giving you a whole bunch of numbers, a whole bunch of stats and data of what you should do, etc, etc, etc. It does have its own simplified leveling guide for you to follow. It also has some tips and tricks of what you should do as you're leveling, plus some more in-depth explanation on new features, if perhaps you haven't kept track of those. Like, for example, what's the inspiration catalyst and what's it gonna do? What about the main quests to complete in the first weeks of the expansion? What about the new talent systems, the new features of the talent system? What about dragon riding, etc, etc, etc. So this is more of a general macro level type of guide, which, if you already kept up with the news in Dragonflight, if you already have been following all of the additions from Dragonflight, these are things that perhaps you will know already. So this is maybe a better guide for returning players, you know, for last minute returns that are still quite behind on what's new in Dragonflight. This guide is perhaps better for them. And then once you got yourself familiar with what's new in here, you can jump into more in-depth guides and explanations of what Dragonflight going to be about. Because of course there is no point in you reading a guide or watching a guide about the crafting of the high item level pieces of gear if you have no idea about what the bottled essences and the sparks of innovations are. Right? You have to first understand the basics before you get into more details. So this one is a more bird's eye view, general type of guide for Dragonflight. Then we jump into the complete opposite, because while the guide we just went over is more hands-off and more on the explaining side, this one is going to pilot you from start to end. This leveling guide from Mr. Roguery is essentially a do this step by step, and by step by step I mean very step by step, from the moment you are in Stormwind or Orgrimmar all the way to the moment until you hit level 70. This should be around 6 to 7 hours in speed to hit max level, which is fast. For players who are not used to level fast, this is fast, okay? The current fastest leveling speed without any type of experience buff, like without the WoW anniversary buff, without the Dark Moon Fair buff, etc, 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 it's about 4 hours. So getting in the 6 to 7 hour range is very good. If you have never paid attention or bothered to level fast, this would be a pretty fast leveling guide. And as I said, Mr. Roguery in this guide does a very good job at speaking in first person, as if you are essentially thinking about it out loud by yourself as you read this guide. Okay, now I should go and kill these mobs, and then I will go turn the quest in here, and then I will mount on my dragon and fly to this quest objective. You know, it will basically just tell you what to do, step by step, quest by quest. So if you think you're lost in the leveling, if you think you have looked at some leveling guides, but they are far too general, like, oh yeah, go into this quest tab, do the cool quests, you know, skip the bad ones and move on. This one will essentially just pilot your leveling experience, trying to make it a little bit more efficient, without you having to have had some previous knowledge about how to level up in Dragonflight. Now, I left the best and also the largest for last, because this is Asmodeus's guide for Dragonflight. Now, this guide is massive and also contains a massive amount of information, and also it paid absolutely no attention to aesthetics and to presentation, because of course it looks like a mess. It looks like a bunch of words vomited on the screen. As you keep going tab by tab, it gets more and more confusing and complicated, right? But once you get past that, once you get past how clunky it looks, you start seeing a whole lot of information that you might find very useful for your leveling experience and your first few days resets of your max level experience in Dragonflight. So the guide itself even starts before the expansion, because it starts with the pre-patch, the phase 1 of the pre-patch, and then it goes on to the second phase of the pre-patch, it goes on to the release of the expansion, the global release times. But what is more important is going to be the leveling tips. So you have a whole list of leveling tips, as well as the current world records filled with XP boosts. If you still want to check them out, they're still there with the links. And then the route planner. This looks confusing, and it is confusing, but once you get the hang of how this works, it can help you a lot in making decisions by yourself, right? If you don't want to get piloted point by point, like in the previous leveling guide, then this one might be more for you. The lines you see here in yellow, 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3, for the different zones are the main quests, which you must complete to continue the quest lines. So those are basically a must. But to the side, right here, the Waking Shores and then Oharan Plains, these are all the side objectives, the side quests you can do or skip. What makes this very handy and very cool to have quite close as you level is that they will tell you at which part of the main quest these will become available and at which location it will be. So in this case, this is the step 1.12, which is right here, my first real emergency. As this one unlocks and you're doing this quest, these are going to be the side quests that will become available, and this will be the experience they will reward. So this will be helpful to show you how large, essentially how large of a quest hub this spot will be. Because of course, a point like 112 has a lot of quests, or a point like 2.3 or a point like 3.5 in the story have a whole lot of quests. But then you might have tiny little quests, tiny little quest hub with just one quest as a reward, as a side reward. So this, if you don't want to get piloted from start to finish of your leveling experience, might help you understand and see which of the side quests are available, which are not, which are big quest hubs and which are small quest hubs, etc., etc. This might help you as well in your leveling. Now, besides the leveling, of course, there are going to be way more things you can do at max level. So aside from the information points, like for example, knowing about the leveling gear item level, the max level item level, and all of the possible different brackets of this salad of item levels we are getting in Dragonflight, the different gear from the heroic dungeon, the entrances to the different dungeons, as well as the mythic plus dungeon gear rewards, etc., etc. What starts getting quite interesting and important is going to be the reps and the renown. This will be quite important for you if you ever want to interact with the profession system. If you're thinking about, for example, playing multiple characters and you're thinking and you're choosing the different professions for your characters, this part will be very important, because in Dragonflight, many of the more powerful or more rewarding, more pricey type of recipes for your professions will be tied behind reputation, behind different factions. And this is where this one will help you a lot, because this one, for example, will show you which recipes of which profession are going to be tied behind which reputation faction. This will give you a very good idea, for example, of which factions do you have to target, do you have to level up with daily quests and world quests and whatnot to get up with a certain faction to unlock whatever recipe you want. In this case, for example, you can see jewel crafting. All of the idols of jewel crafting, which is the trinket, the new jewel crafting trinket, are going to be gated behind Dragonscale Expedition rep and Iskara Toskar rep. So they will require quite a good amount of grinding for the faction to get up to those rewards. So of course, if you want to be a jewel crafter, those two are going to be the factions you have to go after. But what happens if you were planning on being a jewel crafter at the same time as being a blacksmith? Because while a jewel crafter will want to go with the Dragonscale Expedition and the Iskara Toskar, a blacksmith will want to go with the centaurs and with the Valdrakken Accord. So now suddenly you have 4 different factions you have to grind with a single character, because you want to have all of the different recipes of all these different factions. So you might come to terms to do something like this, which can help you as well. And this type of thing might help you choose the combo of professions you want to give to each of your character based on which factions you will have to grind. You know, maybe you will say, okay, there is no point in playing blacksmithing and mining and leatherworking and skinning if I can just take one character with skinning and mining and then the other character with blacksmithing and leatherworking. If this way I can just grind one faction which gives me the rewards, the patterns and the recipes of blacksmithing and leatherworking with one character. If I kept leatherworking on one character with skinning and blacksmithing on one character with mining, I would have had to grind the same faction twice on 2 different characters. Because I am the bearer of bad news, even though these bad news have been a thing for a couple of months now, the profession and the renown you gain with profession is not account-wide. It is exclusively account-wide for cosmetic stuff. Pets, toys, titles, and whatnot, those are account-wide, not the recipes, not the patterns for your professions, which means you will always have to grind certain factions with the character you want the recipes with. So it's going to be quite important for you if you were planning on playing multiple characters, for example, to try to mix and match your professions so you minimize the amount of factions you have to grind to get all of the better recipes for your profession. And this is something you can find quite easily in this guide, alongside plenty of other things, more in-depth explanations about crafting, about also things like knowledge points, where you can find all of the different knowledge points for your skill professions, where they can come from. You can also find things like open world collectibles and treasures by different professions, obtainable by the different professions. That's going to be found in here as well. More in-depth things about professions, about work orders, you know, explanations and a description of how, for example, work orders are going to work, how recrafting is going to work. So this guide is definitely more in-depth than the previous 2. So as I said, it's going to be better to get into this guide if you already have the basics of Dragonflight and you already know many of the things they are talking about. Like, for example, if you read a page called Profession Tool Crafters, it should be a good thing for you to already know that that's because in Dragonflight, professions are going to have 3 items you can equip to buff your stats. That's why you have a page called Profession Tool Crafters. And the reason why it's here is because every single profession won't be able to craft every single tool for themselves, which means you will have to go out and ask other profession crafters to craft your tools for your own profession. This is Blizzard trying to encourage the player base to use work orders, for example. So to close, this is the more in-depth, the more technical type of guide, the more, let's just say, elite type of guides with more information, more in-depth information for you to gauge and to check when it comes to Dragonflight. The other 2, on the other hand, one is a little bit more general, it's a little bit more laid back in terms of explaining what the expansion is going to be about, and the other one is a literal hands-on your character to pilot it from level 60 to level 70 to give you a smooth leveling experience. So these are the 3 types of resources I wanted to give to you. I wanted to make available to you, as you might have seen already, perhaps 1 or 2 of these in some helpful links here and there. These are definitely going to be quite helpful to quite a lot of players. So to anyone who didn't have any of these already in their bookmarks, you are welcome. So for today, this other bit of an infomercial for the Dragonflight leveling experience, as well as the max level planning of your characters, we are done for today. As in just a few hours at this point, if you're watching this video as it's come out, I'm going to be streaming quite soon, so it's time to leave each other to eventually perhaps see each other in a bit. Thanks, of course, as usual, to all of my Patreon supporters for helping and contributing to the growth of the channel. You can still, don't forget, support in other ways, which don't include having to take away money from your donation fund to your favorite e-girl. You can still support by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. These are still going to be quite helpful sources of support. And lastly, for more social interactions, you can follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribing to my Patreon to get access to my Discord server. And as of recently, you can also follow me and find me on Twitch over at these 3 links. With this out of the way, it's time to leave each other. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, it must be something about recording. Every time I am about the end of the recording, the nose starts itching. It must be some sort of Pavlovian response at this point.